Hello and welcome back. This is Poli with part 2 of my creating 3D printable merge in Blender series Final Fantasy style. Today we're gonna talk about what to keep in mind when designing an object for 3D printing and best practices. What to keep in mind when modeling an object that should be 3D printable. We start with a clean new Blender. I already activated the screen keys and I made my mouse a little bit bigger so everyone can see it better now. The first thing to keep in mind is to keep the object watertight or solid. So let's add a quick UV sphere here. And this is by default watertight and solid. When this gets printed, it's printing as a whole ball because the slicer that produces the instructions for the printer on how to print it will see it's a closed shell and it's not hollow inside, and so it will print a full ball. If we go into edit mode with tab and delete one of those faces here, you see it now has a hole inside. If the slicer sees something like this, it decides probably it would try to fix it and fill the hole itself, but in the worst case it will think, oh, that's not a solid object, that's just a shell. Maybe it will lose the whole ring over here and only print the upper and the lower half, or print it just as a shell, meaning just one line all around. On all, it's gonna be pretty bad. So just keep your meshes closed. They have to be one solid object in order for the printer to know what to do. So if you've got any holes, go over here, select them, shift left click and fill with F. It's closed, it's solid and printable. Next thing to keep in mind when printing multiple objects. Every object should have its own shell because the printer is looking for shells of objects. Shells meaning the outer forms of this object. So if you got more than one object, or even one object that is set up of multiple parts, like you got a head and the head got eyes and the eyes are a shell on its own and the head is another shell. That would be really bad for the printer because he's trying to separate the shells and the things won't get connected. Because the printer is printing outlines first, speaking of an FDM printer, it's printing outline first and then printing infill inside. So with multiple shells, it would separate them and the pieces would come off easily. So when you have overlapping objects that should be one, don't just join them. For example, if I get this ball the second time and I want this to be one object, don't just join them because there's a shell inside here and another, and the printer just won't know what to do. It will create weird stuff and not really one object. So don't press Control J, so selecting both, Control J, joining them to one. It will be one object, but still with separated shells. Use Boolean instead. Boolean to union. Because if I'm doing that, let me undo that quick. And if I'm using Boolean to join them both, like I'm hiding this, getting here, using a modifier, Boolean, union, let's do it fast, select a sphere, it will join them the same way, they look the same from the outside, but if you go inside, you see it got rid of the overlapping shells. This is now one united shell, and this could be printed. Because it's closed, it's got only one shell, everything's fine. Let's get rid of that again. For the next thing to keep in mind is keep your object manifold. Manifold is meaning every edge and face only should connect to other shells, to only two other shells. Like let's, for example, take the cube. This cube is right now completely manifold. There's to every edge there's only two sides connected. If you would add, we select here an edge, go to wireframe and extrude this with E, we have now another face inside. That is not manifold. The printer is again looking for shells, and when seeing faces inside, it could interpret it as it's having a shell inside and not on the outside, and could possibly create a big hole over here at the spot where it connects, or ignore the shell on the outer side completely. It just produces errors. Keep it clean. So get rid of that. Don't even want to look at it. Another thing when designing things is, if possible, plan ahead. Plan for what kind of printer you're using, plan for what kind of material you're using, and try to plan already in the first steps what kind of geometry you're using. Like with too much overhang or bridges, you're gonna need a lot of supports. So for creating things that are overhangs, there is the thing called 45-degree rule. Meaning, if this gets print with the print bed being down here, and we want to have an overhang on the right side, like so, don't go over the 45 degrees of the overhang, because it goes over here. You're gonna need supports for this, like here and here and here. Because with FDM, if you're printing from the lowest layer upwards, the layers here will get printed into thin air. If there's nothing to support it, you will get ugly spaghetti print. That said, let's go back again to the last but not least rule. When designing objects that aren't solid as this cube, maybe they're hollow, keep in mind wall thickness. Every printer has a minimum depth of wall thickness. Every filament, every nozzle. If you go under that wall thickness, like making it really, 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 really thin, so it may not be printable. If you have a wall thickness that's below the nozzle size or the resolution of your SLA printer, it won't get printed, or it will get pixelated. That's it for part 2 on quick tips for modeling objects for 3D printing. And right next we're gonna start with modeling a jobstone. See you soon!